What's up, guys? Today I want to talk about this book. This is Genki Volume 1. This is almost universally recommended as a textbook that pretty much everyone should study when you're learning Japanese. And today I want to talk about my entire experience with this book because I just recently picked it up earlier this month from the library in New York, and I have already been learning Japanese for a while, so I had quite a strong foundation of vocabulary and a little bit of grammar before starting this book. And so as a result, I was able to work through this book very quickly. And so I finished this book in a matter of a week and something like 8 or 9 hours. So I just want to walk through kind of the process and some of the key points that I keep in mind when I'm working with a grammar book, studying the way that I do. So before starting with this book, I had already had a vocabulary of over 900 words, close to 1,000, and close to 600 kanji characters that I knew. And so this book assumes for most students that you're going to be starting out with a lot less than that. So having that extra vocabulary was really helpful. Okay, so step one, build a foundation in the language. Next, once you open the book and actually start learning, here's the kinds of things that I look out for. This first section, this is all about explaining what the book is about, and then this whole section about explaining the Japanese writing system, the hiragana and katakana spelling system, and I'm already way past that, so I can skip this stuff. This explains what kanji are. I mean, this really starts from ground zero, but I've already done a lot of this foundational work, so I'm going to skip all of that. And I actually started here. If you want to look at the book, I started on page 34. And here we have some pictures of different scenarios. Ohayo, that's good morning. Ohayo gozaimasu, that's the formal version of good morning. Konnichiwa, konbanwa, good evening, goodbye, good night, that kind of thing. So I already knew most of these, but there were a few that I didn't know, like what you say when you go to bed. I mean, I don't know. I never had a reason to learn that, so that would be something that I would write down and make a flashcard out of. These phrases for when you leave the house, there's kind of set standard phrases that people normally say, like, okay, I'm going out. And then there's something that the people in the house say, like, okay, go ahead, bye. And they have a similar thing when you come back in the house. So I wanted to learn those kind of vocabulary words. So that's pretty straightforward. The basic rule of thumb here is that anytime I see something surprising, I make a flashcard about it, or something interesting, or something that seems useful. The next page, we have some explanations about all of these phrases and what they're used for. Generally, I will read these, but reading it once is usually enough. So I'll read it and then just leave it be. As long as I have a flashcard for that word or that phrase with a picture that sort of conveys the meaning, then that's enough to just read this and then be done with it. Now, the next principle that I apply when working on a textbook, if I'm using a spaced repetition flashcard system like Anki, which I am, then these exercises in the book are not really that useful for me. So if I make a flashcard for a grammar concept, then that's enough for it to start sticking in my head. So the next principle is to skip all of the grammar exercises. If you're using flashcards and making your own flashcards and doing this right, you don't need to spend time on these exercises. Now this next point is specific to Genki and the format of this book. So typically at the beginning of a chapter there's a dialogue, like a little short conversation between two friends, and then in the rest of the chapter they kind of explain the grammar concepts from that dialogue. Sometimes I actually read through these and made flashcards from this dialogue, but as I got further into the book I found it more helpful actually just to skip this dialogue because they're going to talk about the grammar later anyway. So if you're trying to do it super efficiently, I think you can skip past this part. Same goes for the vocabulary. In my case, I have already a very good source of vocabulary flashcards because I'm working from the core series decks, and that has audio and all this great stuff, so I'm not super concerned with pulling vocabulary from this book. I want to mainly just milk it for the grammar concepts and then be done with it. And so now we get to this section where it says grammar, and this is where I'm going to start taking notes that I'm going to make into flashcards. And I'm not going to detail how to make those flashcards because I've already done that in detail. So if you want to check out kind of the approach I'm using, you can look at a video called How to Learn Grammar, I think, and then there's another one that has something to the effect of how to make effective flashcards for Japanese, something like that. And that'll explain how I'm making the flashcards, because the approach is exactly the same for this. So anyway, I would go through this, pick up a few examples, anything that I see surprising or anything that I don't know, I'll just take the example sentence from the book and then make a grammar flashcard for that concept. Moving on, we've got more examples. I would do the same thing here. We've got these culture notes. These are interesting to read, but I don't necessarily make flashcards out of those. And then we get to this practice section. These are all the exercises, and I just skip all of that. There's really no reason to do these. Now, something like this page, which is all about time and age, I might actually skip this and come back to it. I'm really trying to get the grammar stuff, but this is also useful. And since I have to give this book back to the library, and I don't want to lose this information, I might take a picture of this page and just make a note of it somewhere in a text file to come back to later when I have time. And then moving on, I would use the same approach for all of these chapters. Probably skip the dialogue, although you can read it if you want. It's probably not a bad idea. But if you're going for ultimate efficiency, you can probably get away with skipping that, skipping the vocabulary, and then just making flashcards out of these grammar examples. Generally, I'll make one flashcard per grammar concept, maybe 2 or maybe 3 at the most, but generally I only need 1 or 2 to kind of get the idea in my head, as long as I make the flashcards in a way that's clear to me what's happening. And just to give you a kind of example of the kinds of things that I'm writing down from this book, if we take a look at my text file here, I have some things like, okay, for example, I have tsumori, which is I intend to. Like, I intend to play tennis with Takeshi this weekend. We have 3 different sentences that use this concept. And so when I'm going back through this text file to make flashcards later, generally I'll just take one of these sentences and make a flashcard out of it. I might take 2 if I really want, but generally I'll just use 1 and see how that goes, and then I will kind of file away the other examples for later use. So I can come back to it again if I need to later. Back to the book, there's grammar, cultural notes to read. Stuff about Japanese currency is interesting, but nothing you have to make flashcards about. And then more exercises. So again, just skip all of this stuff. And so using this approach, I found that after, I don't know, an hour or 2, I was able to get through like a quarter of this book. And, after 3 or 4 or 5 hours, I was halfway through. And then finally, after like 8 hours, I finished this book. There is still some work left I have to do on my text file. You can see this is stuff that I haven't made flashcards out of yet. Just until here, to this line. And so that'll take me, I don't know, maybe a few hours still. I would say, 1 to 3 hours to make flashcards for all of this stuff, depending on how many things I end up using. But in general, we're talking about, if that's the case, under 15 hours. I mean, somewhere between 10 and 15 hours to basically suck all of the useful content out of this book. So since I know most of the words in most of these sentences, I can fly through this stuff, take 1 example, maybe 2 of each grammar concept, skip the exercises, skip the vocab pages, and then when I got to the end of the book, the whole last section is just a list of kanji. But since I've been learning kanji for everything that I've been learning, I already know all of these characters. And so there's really nothing left for me to do in this whole last 25% of the book. So just like that, I was able to fly through this book very quickly. in a very efficient way using this technique because I had already built up a foundation in the language. I'm happy I went through this book. Personally, I liked it. I found the explanations to be helpful, and I would recommend it to anybody that is thinking about using the book. Going forward from here, I'm going to continue working on the core deck for vocabulary. I'll be continuing my italki lessons, but as far as textbooks go, I have already reserved Genki #2 from the library. We'll see when that becomes available. In the meantime, there's another book that I've been working on, which will probably be the next thing that I tackle as far as grammar goes, and that is a digital book called 80/20 Japanese. And it's written by a guy named Richard Webb, and he has a great website about Japanese with a lot of cool articles about grammar and different aspects of the language. So I would recommend checking that out, or at least checking out the website, kind of get a feel for what it's all about. But it's very well written, very concise. That'll probably be the next thing that I work through in this fashion, making flashcards for the grammar. And then we'll see what happens. So hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and see you next time. Bye.